very early on in the Bible, Satan kind of took hold of this engine of kind of one world religion, one world speech. Remember, they all spoke the same language at that time, so Satan could unify them in that manner. And God confused the language so they couldn't even get their city and their tower built. Let's continue to push through some of these passages. Genesis chapter 12, right, the very next chapter over, we now begin to read, "Now the Lord said to Abram," who's Abram? "Go from your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." Where is Abraham going from, and where is he going to? If you've read your Bible carefully, you'll actually find out that Abraham actually originated in the same place that the Tower of Babel, in that part of the world, over on the in the Mesopotamian area, the land of Shinar all over again, Iraq, Ur of the Chaldees is in that part of the world. But God said, I want to call you out of that area, and I'm going to send you to some place that represents my righteousness, where I'm going to place my name, and where my laws are going to go forth. So Abraham, very early on, becomes the origin of Jerusalem, right? He's the beginnings of a people that God's going to call out and make a name for himself, right? Israel. And within that people, he's going to give them a land there in the land of Canaan, and God's going to give them a city, Jerusalem. So Abraham is the beginnings of that. So the reason I'm reading these passages back to back is so that we can see that even though Satan has his one world system, his world governments, he's going to be controlling down through history. And when we get to the book of Daniel, this will be very, very important for us as we begin to identify these different wicked systems or different kingdoms that Satan has usurped and utilized as tools to challenge God. We have to remember all the while that Jerusalem and the people of Israel are always going to represent the people of God and the city of God. And Abraham is the father of that beginning. So that's why God's saying, get away from your father's house. In other words, go out of Ur of the Chaldees, and I'll make you into a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. You shall be a blessing. Verse 3, I'll bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So that passage here in Genesis 12, packed with so much meaning, right? The gospel's right there about blessing you. We know that the Messiah is going to come from the lineage of Abraham, from the lineage of Israel, from the Jewish people, right? From the tribe of Judah specifically. So this is, again, the two cities that we're seeing being at their very early stages being crafted for us by the language of the Bible. On the one hand, on the wicked side, on the dark side of this discussion, we've got Babylon and Babylonia, the Babylonian system, the origins of Nimrod's Babylon, and the origins of evil and a wicked man-driven system that opposes God and God's ways and will continue to do so down through history until the end of time. And then on the other hand, on the light side of the discussion of our table, we've got Abraham, the father of both Jews and Gentiles who are faithful, the father of the people of Israel, the father of a people who are going to bring the Messiah into the world, the people who are going to dwell in a land called Israel and a city called Jerusalem, where there will be a temple of God, where he'll take up his residency in the Holy of Holies, right? So all that is righteous and holy in the world is going to be concentrated in that part of the world, and Babylon is going to represent all of the darkness and the wickedness. Indeed, we can actually trace wicked religions to this area of the world in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, the cradle of false religious systems as they spread around the world and take their false ideologies and belief systems and things like that. So that's kind of what we're working from. This will give us a better appreciation for the prophecies that we're going to be looking at when we start looking at Israel's history and she gets judged for disobeying God and having getting involved in idolatry, right? Getting involved in Satan's system. God has to reach down and punish her. And at the same time, we're also going to see when we read through the book of Revelation that the devil's going to begin amassing armies and leaders and world kings and kingdoms together to challenge God in one final effort to destroy God's kingdom and prevent his Messiah from setting up the kingdom on earth. Let's turn now to Deuteronomy 4. By this point in time, Israel is already a people group. You can see we're progressing rapidly as we're moving through the verses that I've put together for us. In Deuteronomy 4, we have Moses predicting to the people or forewarning them that in a nutshell, God will bless you if you are obedient and faithful and have faith in him and walk in his ways. And the opposite is true, the reverse, the converse is true. If you break faith with God, break covenant keeping with God, break covenant faithfulness with God, and turn to the ways of the wickedness around you, right? The devil in all of his ways. If you fall prey to that, then the Lord will issue punishment. But notice the language. Starting in verse 25, when you father children and have grandchildren, you grow old in the land, and you act corruptly and make an idol in the form of anything and do what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God to provoke him to anger. Notice then what is the result, right? Moshe is setting up a scenario where Israel is going to be in the land in the future, right? Moses is long dead and gone, but in the future, Israel is going to find themselves in the land, and they're going to be surrounded by the possibility of idol worship and disobedience to God, right? The possibility is always there, right? The threat of idolatry and the opportunity to sin is always before us, even as believers, right? We live in the world, but we're not to be of the world. Israel is called to be different, separate from the world, to live a sanctified way, to showcase God's ways, to be a representative of God in the earth by demonstrating what it means to be a righteous people and to walk in God's ways, right? They're chosen for that reason to be the ambassadors of God's kingdom. Not that God doesn't love any of the other people groups. Rather, Israel was chosen to be a type and shadow of an ambassador, of an apostle, of a disciple, of a messenger, of a butler, serving God and serving the rest of the world around them and showcasing God's righteousness, kind of like the Great Commission, but way back in Deuteronomy. In fact, I when I read through Deuteronomy chapter 4, I like to think of it almost like the Jewish Great Commission. If you read earlier up in the chapter, you'll find what I'm talking about, where God told Israel to live in such a way so that their light would shine to the rest of the world, so that the peoples around them would be attracted to the walk of Torah that they were supposed to be walking in, the lifestyle that they would be living, which is the lifestyle that God modeled for them in the pages of the Torah. And yet Israel is going to find themselves failing to do this. And so Moses is predicting this, right, in advance. This is going to happen to you. I call heaven and earth as witness against you, picking up the reading in verse 26. Today that you will certainly perish quickly from the land where you are going over the Jordan to take possession of it. You will not live long on it, but you will be utterly destroyed. What's Moses predicting? If you turn from God and his ways, if you spurn God's judgments and righteous commandments, if you break faith with God and covenant faithfulness with God, for his part, God will do this to you. So it's the result of consequences of your disobedience, your idolatry, your wickedness, your fornication, your playing the harlot, etc., right? This is what's going to happen to you. God's not going to sit by idly and wink his head, turn a blind eye and go, oh, well, my children are just up to no good again, but I love them and I'm going to continue to bless them. No. God does not bless wickedness, right? So the Lord will punish you. You get kicked out of the land, and then all kinds of bad things are going to follow. The Lord will scatter you among the peoples, and you'll be left few in number among the nations where the Lord drives you. There you will serve gods, the work of human hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear, nor eat nor smell anything. But from there, notice, Moses is predicting, of course, it's the Spirit of God in Moses saying these things. Moses is predicting that even in exile, Israel, from the lands of exile, God will not have given up on you yet. God can put it in your heart to seek after him. And indeed, you have this responsibility to continue to repent and turn from your wickedness and to seek God. What does Moses say in verse 29? But from there, you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search for him, right? God can still be found with all your heart, with all your soul. So God is patiently waiting for you to get your act together, even in the timeout place where you'll be, even in the exiled lands that you will find yourselves. Verse 30, when you are in distress and all these things happen to you in the latter days, you will return to the Lord your God and listen to his voice. Verse 31, for the Lord your God, this is a very important verse, listen. For the Lord your God is a compassionate God. He will not abandon you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant with your fathers, which he swore to them. Why is verse 31 so important? Deuteronomy 4:31. Why am I singling this out? Because as we begin to read through the prophecies that we're going to do so here in the heavy hitters like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Micah, things like that, Daniel, what we're going to find is that over and over again, Israel finds herself in timeout. Over and over again, she finds herself playing the harlot, being idol worshipers, participating in the idol worship of the countries around her, the nations around her. She becomes disobedient to God's ways. She doesn't walk in his Torah the way she should. She forsakes faith in God, and God sends her into exile. Ultimately, she gets sent into exile. We're going to see that. We're going to see this hopefully tonight if we still have time. And what happens? God is telling them in advance that I have to punish you because I'm not just a God of love and grace and compassion, but I'm also a God of justice. I'm a God of righteousness. I can't just turn a blind eye to wickedness. I have to punish wickedness. And so God, for his part, puts Israel in these difficult situations. He tests them. He tries them. He punishes them because they're his people. But more important than that, God is a God of compassion. And so he tells us in verse 31 that he will not abandon you nor destroy you. And the reason this is important from my understanding is that very early on in the book of Deuteronomy, you find that no matter how wicked Israel gets, God has determined in advance that he will keep his promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob way back in the book of Genesis. And because of that, even though Israel looks like she's going to be ultimately wiped off the face of the earth, she doesn't. God always spares himself a remnant of people within the larger group of disobedient people. And it's this remnant that God works with, woos back to himself, and pours out his compassion and grace on, his forgiveness, and draws them to himself and continues the promises that he made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob long ago. So even though Israel gets to the point where she's eating her own children because she's starving because of being put in a place where she can't even get food, she's eating her own kids. I mean, that's abhorrent. I mean, that's just disgusting. Nevertheless, God says over and over again, and we'll see this in the prophets, nevertheless, there is a glorious future awaiting you, Israel, because I myself, God, am going to retain a remnant. There will be a faithful slice of people that will remain, that I myself will preserve, and I will pour out my compassion upon them and continue my covenant faithfulness that I made to the fathers through this remnant. Indeed, Paul picks up on this in Romans 11. We'll see later on. Maybe if we get to it tonight, that would be great. So why is this important again? Because by comparison, the wicked nations around Israel that also participate not just in idolatry and tempt Israel to go astray with their wickedness and their iniquity and their harlotries and their just all-purpose wickedness of humanity, etc., etc. But what we also find is that when the prophets foretell of the destructions of these wicked cities that are around Israel, or their participation in exiling Israel and things like that, and besieging Jerusalem, we don't find any promises of rebuilding these cities. So when it comes to Babylon, right, we're working from this tale of two cities idea. When we get to the end of the books, or the prophets working towards the end of the book of Revelation, we don't find any promises that Babylon's going to be rebuilt. We do find promises that Babylon will be destroyed, but we don't find any promises that God would not abandon Babylon or not destroy you or forget the covenant that he had with that Babylon or something. Why? Because there isn't any covenant with Babylon that God makes. He only makes the covenant with Jerusalem. So no matter how you slice and dice your end-time prophecy, your eschatology, and your view of biblical end-time events, if you're holding to a view that sees Israel being taken out of the picture, then you're wrong, because you're fighting against God's plans right? If your dispensationalism or your replacement theology says there's no place for Israel at the end, then you've got an incorrect view of end time prophecy. And that's going to go a long way towards helping us understand who Mystery Babylon is when we get to Revelation chapter 17 and 18. Let's keep going in Deuteronomy. I'm sorry, not in Deuteronomy. In our look through passages out of the Bible that talk about these two systems, good righteousness and wickedness, clashing with one another. In Psalm 95, we have the psalmist writing a praise to the Lord and warning against unbelief. And this again is going to start, we're going to start working from this idea that God is warning Israel in advance. Don't break faith with me. Don't break obedience with me, right? If you want to be blessed, do things my way. But if you do not do things my way, then I, as a covenant-keeping God, will bring calamity your way. I'll bring tribulation your way. We're working toward this theme of the idea that from an end-time perspective, if you name the name of God, if you are identified as God's own righteous people, whether you're Jewish or Christian, right? Whether you're part of the physical line of Abraham or the spiritual line of Abraham as a Christian, then God, for his part, will covenantally protect you and bless you and keep faith with you. But if you break faith with God, God will send punishment. Indeed, for those who are watered down in their faith, for those who are complacent, for those who are lackadaisical, for those who are backsliding in their faith, for those who are compromising in the ways of God, God has warnings for you. And let's begin to read these warnings that firstly apply to Israel in the natural sense as the people of God. But in a spiritual sense, they apply to anyone who names the name of God, meaning if you're a Christian today and you're reading through, like we're going to read Psalm 95 here, parts of it, then this applies to you if you name the name of God and you believe that Jesus is your Messiah. Come, let's sing for joy to the Lord. Let's shout joyfully to the rock of our salvation. Let's come before his presence with a song of thanksgiving. Let's shout joyfully to him in songs with instruments. Right? Christians can say these words just like faithful Jews can. For the Lord is a great God, a great king above all gods, in whose hand are the depths of the earth. The peaks of the mountains are also his. The sea is his, for it was he who made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Verse 5. Verse 6. Come, let us worship and bow down, kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand. Does this apply to Jewish people? Faithful Jewish people? Those who are covenant keeping and keeping his commandments? Yes, you bet. Does this apply to genuine Christians who name the name of Yeshua as their Lord? Absolutely. That's why I'm reading this passage. Notice the psalmist says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on the day of Massah in the wilderness. What's the psalmist referencing? He's reminding the Jewish people here of a time when they grumbled against God and they hardened their hearts, and God had to judge that generation. And we can remember that that was the generation of people whose bones dropped in the desert and they did not go into the promised land. Indeed, as the psalmist says, when your fathers put me to the test, they tested me though they had seen my work. The work that he's referring there to is the Exodus from Egypt. They saw my work. For 40 years, I was disgusted with that generation. So God's reminding the current generation here in the Psalms of a previous wicked generation. And for I was disgusted with that generation and said, they are a people who err in their heart. Watch this. And they do not know my ways. Therefore, watch God's reaction. I swore in my anger, they certainly shall not enter my rest. What's the rest that's being spoken of here? It was the promised land. The promised land of Israel.